Are you a comparaholic? You may be surprised at the answer to that question. Today, I have a really special guest, and we are going to dive into this whole conversation about comparison and playing the comparison game. So, if you are stressed out and overwhelmed a lot of the time, you may actually be comparing yourself, and it may not be against others. So, I hope you'll listen to the show today and learn more about this and how you can use this comparison game to your advantage. I am really excited about this episode, and so I suggest you grab a piece of paper and a pencil because it is chock full of great information. Welcome to Longing for More, where Christians come to strengthen their faith, revive their soul, and learn to live their lives with a sense of fulfillment and peace. Listen each week to learn how to incorporate your faith into your daily activities, stop wandering through life feeling empty and unfulfilled, and begin to live your more. Let's get started. Hey everyone, as promised, I have a very special friend. She's a coach and an author, and she is going to share with us today. We're going to be talking about comparison. And so I am just so honored to introduce to you Renee Vidor. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you got it perfect.
Awesome. Welcome to the show today. I am so excited to visit with you about this most important topic. But before we dive into that, I'd love it if you could just share us a little bit about you and your background.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I love this topic and I love what you're doing. A little about my background. I was born and raised in Ohio in the US, and I am the oldest of three. And I've carried that oldest trait very well, very independent, responsible. I finished college, got married, had a baby, built a house all in 1 year. 21, by the way. So I've lived several different aspects of life. And as far as background goes, I'm a psychology major. I love people. I love Jesus, and I love my family and dark chocolate. So there's a little bit about me.
Awesome. You described you being the oldest, and I'm the middle child of three. But there's a lot of things you described that I could fit into too. So that's an interesting situation. But yeah, we have a lot more in common than I realized. In that dark chocolate, oh yeah, for
Gotta have it.
sure. So we are here today to talk about comparison, and we'll talk about your book later and give you an opportunity to share more details about that. But when we first talked, I knew right away that this was something that we needed to talk about. In a different view, I share my story. And what's interesting for me is that I've never considered myself to be competitive. I'm not into sports. If I'm going to do something, I want to do something where I'm competing against myself. But then as I was writing, I started realizing all of these things that where I was being competitive and making it about me. A lot of times it was like, I've talked about how I'm my own worst enemy sometimes because I'm always being so critical and trying harder because I want to prove to the world that I'm worthy, basically. Yeah.
Yes.
That's not just me, is it?
Oh my goodness. You're speaking like we're the same person. Absolutely. What's so interesting is when I started recognizing that I was a comparaholic, it was not something that came natural for me to recognize. And I realized that typically every single person struggles with this, but because of our inner dialogue, what the story we've been telling ourselves is not necessarily the truth. So for myself, like you're saying, you didn't think you were competitive. I actually was. I was very competitive, and I don't have to win something, but I'm going to try and I'm going to do my darndest if I can. But what I recognize is that it's not always against another person that we're competing. It's not even just against ourselves, but what we are competing against are these expectations that we've put out there, this false story that we're competing against and comparing ourselves to. And we can't measure up because it's not realistic.
Well, and you just hit the nail on the head, because for me, I talk about how we need to trust God. We need to get back to that point where he wants us to live in peace, and he wants us to be fulfilled with our lives. But we put so much pressure on ourselves on all of these things. And so we're living just stressed out and overwhelmed. And I, I just remember so much of my professional career, I spent, just, I was making myself sick because I was, if I wasn't just working long hours, and I tried really hard not, I wanted to keep that balance in my life. So I was one of those people that didn't work tons and tons of extra hours. I did when I needed to, but even when I wasn't working, I was tense about making sure that I was, doing all of these things. And truly, when I look back at it, there were so many times when it was me. Nobody asked me to do some of the things that I was doing. Right.
It's so true. I was reading your book and I wrote it down. Hopefully I can find it here. It was so amazing how you talked about the expectations that you had for yourself and how you were creating you said you were creating expectations for myself that others didn't have of me. And it reminded me of when I finally landed myself in counseling, and it was due to something major happening that I actually had no control over. It was other things happening, circumstances. And the counselor started to recognize in me that I didn't really know who I was anymore. I'd lost my identity. And that came from being a mom and making these roles, right? We had these roles of, in your book, you're a mom, you're a stepmom, you're a wife, you're a problem solver, right? And for me, I was a volunteer. I was a good friend. I was always there for people. I was a great mom, a great wife, doing all the things. But what I found was I was performing. And when that counselor said to me, Renee, you are exhausted. You've got to stop performing. I was angry. I literally looked at her and I was like, what are you talking about? I am authentic. I'm very honest. I'm not a performer. I'm not a drama person. I am the least dramatic person that I know. And that was something I was even taking pride in, right? I was comparing myself to other people that were drama queens. And yet what she said was spot on. I was performing. I had these scripts that I was performing to and trying to measure up, but yet I was the one writing them. I thought everyone else was writing them for me. And that was the big click when I recognized, wow, I'm writing my own show here. And am I even including what the Lord wants? Am I including what if I have the capacity, pen and paper, to write down what my life is going to be and how I'm going to live it and how I'm going to act, I better consult, instead of consulting all the husband and the kids and the volunteer coordinators and all of that, I need to consult the Lord. What does he want of me? And that started the journey for me of identity.
I love that, because that's the piece that I feel was missing when I was in my former career. I was trying to do all of these things, and I put the burden on myself. And I didn't, I talk about in the book the fact that I didn't realize I had this gift of faith, and I put it up on the shelf and I thought, oh, isn't that beautiful? And I go to church on Sunday mornings and I get reinvigorated. I needed that. I can't imagine what my life would have been if I at least not gotten that reset every Sunday. But that was it. And I didn't realize that Jesus was sitting there going, girl, let's hook up here. Let's let me help you. Come to me. Right. And I just, it's like, there have been times I loved my career. I loved what I did. And there have been times when I've said, if I had known then what I know now, I can't imagine how much more effective I would have been and how much more peaceful I would have been. And, man, it's too bad I didn't stay, but I know that, this is a message that needs to get out there. And this is, like I just read in my devotions this morning, how God calls us. He called Abraham to go to Canaan, right? And he had to pick up his family and everything and move. Well, we don't always have to physically pick up and move somewhere, but God does call us to make shifts. And when we look at things differently and start doing life differently. But what I love your scenario about the performing and all of that. But what really I think is important for people that are listening today is that whole piece about how when we can shift our identity and start letting Jesus into our lives. So tell me once you got that, how did things look differently for you in your work world?
Well, first I have to be completely honest. And I think it's important for people to hear because not everyone just gets it. I didn't just get it. This was a long process. In fact, when I was writing my book, Measuring Up, he gave me something called the WIN method. And the I in WIN is an acronym, is innovate your identity. And we're all given the opportunity every day to innovate our identity. And as long as our identity is centered in Christ, if you're a believer, then that's going to be a continual process because we're constantly pruning and refining. So I just wanted to make that clear that for one, I haven't arrived yet. I don't have my identity 100% figured out yet. It is completely evolving all the time because Christ in me is doing that through me. But that helped me to live differently with that mindset shift, with that change, and realizing that I actually have power over my identity. Like God's given me that power. He created me to be who he wants me to be, but he's given me this life to figure it out. And he's given me the Holy Spirit to be able to guide me and direct me. And it's one step at a time. So living that out, while I was not in a career at that time, I was actually on a self-discovery path of personal and professional development. I did work in a MLM company at the time with health and nutrition. And what I saw was, as a mom, that was my main job at the moment. I lived differently. I saw myself differently. And how we see ourselves really does impact those around us. It impacts them because they are able then to see the value. Whereas, honestly, if we're not projecting the value that's within us, nobody really knows. Or they might see little glimpses, and others can sometimes tell us more about us and good things about us than we know. But if we're not living it out and living into our identity and living what God has called us to be and who that person is, then we're leaving a lot trapped inside. We're imprisoning it. So I was a better mom. I was able to better connect emotionally. I believe I was a better wife because I stopped putting all that pressure that I thought my husband was putting on me and recognized, oh, I'm doing that to myself. So hopefully I was a better wife as well. I'll have to ask him sometime. And also I saw myself, I started to say no. I started to set boundaries on my time.
Yes.
I recognized that I empowered more people, which I eventually went into coaching and, the psychology background that I knew I didn't want to go into counseling because that was too much of an empath for that. Like I would just carry all that. I just couldn't do it. But with coaching, I recognized I was actually coaching people all the time, but I was kind of throwing my pearls to swine because I was doing it in such a way that I was allowing people just to come and dump. And sure, I would coach, but they weren't invested at all. So I started to recognize my time and my value. And that's where my identity made a huge impact when I made that mindset shift, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And to me, when we talk about, I just did an article about, our legacy and truly, I mean, that's the work that we're doing. It's about leaving a legacy. It's about bringing others into so that they know and have that relationship with Jesus. And we want our kids to be able to do that. We want everybody to focus on that. And truly, it's how we live. We can know it, but if we aren't living it and doing it, we're not leaving the legacy that we really want to leave, right?
That's a really good point. A pastor once mentioned, and I get details a little bit messed up sometimes. That's the ADHD, I guess. But with Hebrew versus Greek, or is it Greek? I think the Greeks knew, they would say they would know things. And the word know meant like, yeah, it was the Greek. So the Greeks would know something. And yet, to really know something, the way that it was written in, I believe, the Hebrew, if I'm saying this correctly, is to live it. It's to actually have it, embody it. And so we use it here in the English language as like, oh yeah, we know that. I know that. Of course, I know that my identity is in Christ. Yes, of course. But yet to actually have that truth be lived out in our life, that's really the power of, it's more than knowledge. It's knowledge and action, right? So that's what I hear you saying.
And that's the definition of wisdom,
Mm.
is taking the knowledge that we have and applying it to our lives. I'm just going to let that sit for a minute.
Oh, wisdom. Mm.
Because that, and you hit it, it's this knowledge. And one of the things that's really important for me, I feel like I need to say right now, is that you just know, we need to be really careful with that, because we can get downloads, and especially in society today, which is, I mean, we're headed in so many directions, but sometimes our knowing it's twisted, it's turned. And so we need to be plugged into the word, so that when we're getting these ideas and things like that, we can go and confirm that that's what God really intended. And um, I just, to me, the a different view is all about getting back into the Bible and shifting our perspective. And so, I mean, this is such a huge topic, and obviously we could talk for
Ever.
forever. Exactly. Because I loved how you pointed out the fact that this is an evolution. And I think it's important to make the point that when we are comparing ourselves to other people, we're forgetting that they too are an evolution, and we're only seeing what they're wanting us to see, right?
Oftentimes. And God used comparison in such a way that it was beneficial. Like he gave us comparison, and it's not all bad. There are ways that it is so helpful in our lives. And even when we see other people, we can compare ourselves to them. And I say that very delicately because, of course, there's a social norm of what comparing yourself to someone else, it's stealing the joy and all this, but it doesn't have to. I can look at you as someone who has a podcast. I do not currently have a podcast. I get to make choices. I can look at the identity of who God created me to be, and I can think, is that what God wants of me right now or not? And when I look at that, I can think, okay, at this very moment, that's not what he wants of me. So I don't need to look and say, oh my gosh, look where she already is. She already has this all done. If I would just get on it, I could be as good as she is. That's the negative comparison talk. But yet we can use it to our benefit to really look in at who we are and confirm, like you said, going back to the word of God, because it is in us. If we are in it, it is in us. We have the word, we have Jesus in us as a believer. But going back to the word, what do you have for me right now, Lord? What is my identity? Who do you create me to be? And most likely when we start looking outward, we can remind ourselves and compare ourselves to who he created us to be. Oh, I'm not called to be Vana. I'm not called to be this person on Instagram that looks like that. I'm not called to be that person who has so many degrees and credentials and a high career status. And that's okay. Am I being who he created me to be? And that's using comparison to our benefit when we are comparing ourselves to others.
Wonderful. Oh, like I said, we could talk about this all day, but we don't have all day, and nor do our listeners. We we want to respect their time. But I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about your book. I mean, you've talked about it some, but where can people find it? Um, yeah, what would you like us to know about? Um, I just forgot the name of it, so I'm
Well,
going to let you.
perfect. I'll start with that. How about that? No, it's called Measuring Up: How to Win in a World of Comparison. And the premise, more or less, is that we can use comparison to our benefit instead of our detriment. But how do we do that? I found myself in a standpoint, like I said earlier, where I was comparing myself. I was a comparaholic all the time. I was constantly comparing my assets, my appearance, my accomplishments and achievements. And yet I didn't know how to stop. So I did a lot of research and, read every book, tried to figure it out. And it left me back empty. I'm like, okay, well, I'm still doing it. I need to stop. The truth is, I don't need to stop. I actually need to learn how to use it correctly the way that God intended it. So while this book is written really from a secular standpoint, God promised me, He's like, don't worry, I'll be in there. Because I knew I was called to write to anybody to be able to use this message. And He did show up, let me tell you. He's got His ways. I love it. I love it. But this book is something where if you're able to read someone else's story a little bit and put yourself in there and dive right in, use a metaphor of driving. Basically, are you driving down the road of life right now? Okay, well, if you're looking to your left or your right, great. But if you're staring, well, you're going to steer where you stare. So you're going to crash and have an accident.
I
So if you
love
like that,
that.
yeah, if you like that kind of topic, then it might be for you. It's available in audiobook. It's available ebook, paperback, hardback, all that. barnesandnoble.com. You can go to amazon.com, whatever, wherever books are sold. So if it's for you, great, then pick it up.
Awesome. Before we hopped on, you talked about the fact that you are being led and starting now to talk to some college age kids and things like that. And I just want to point that out because that is so important, to be able to get this message at the beginning of our careers instead of like I am at the end of my career. And don't take that wrong. I am not stopping anytime soon, but but if and so I want to plant that seed for folks that if you know of a young person who may benefit from that, and I honestly can't think of any that wouldn't. In fact, I'm planning to buy a couple for my son and his wife who are both in the teaching profession, working with high school, middle-aged kids. I
Yeah.
can see where the benefit of that is. And of course, I have high school grandchildren. So yeah, you just sold like a whole batch for your.
Well, more power to Jesus. I mean, it's His message. So I will share that out there.
Yeah. Well, and I love the fact you said, that it's God's not in it, but He is. And the thing that came to my mind right away was, of course, the story of Esther and the
Yes.
fact that that whole chapter does not mention the word God at all, but He's everywhere in that story. So, and I think that that's beautiful because He doesn't need us to put that label on. We can live it, and I think that that's beautiful. So very, very cool. So I have another question for you, and this is one that I love to ask all of my guests. Do you have a favorite verse that you would like to share with us today?
I have many favorite verses, and that is such a hard topic. However, there is one that I wanted to share due to the fact of this topic of comparison. And it is in 1 Corinthians 9:24. It's really the verse that I use for my business. It says, don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win. And we each have our own life. Our own life is our race. Nobody else can run our race, but we can choose to win. God created us to win. However, we can also choose to lose. So that verse reminds me daily to run my race to win. I want to win at life the way that God called me to.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. That's so beautiful. And it's making me think of uh, something that I put in the book, and I'm actually working on my course, and I put it in there because it's when we get so focused, and I loved how you talked about driving down the road and if you're staring at the other things, but when we get focused on other people and not on God and Jesus, basically Satan is getting exactly what he wants, because when we're not focused on Jesus, then he has this, I mean, we've just given him control, right?
Yeah, we give him victory. I read that in your book too. And I'm like, oh, that is so true. It's just those distractions that he throws out there.
Yeah,
It's that much time that we're not focusing on what the Lord has for us or on him and giving him glory.
right. So anyway, I am how if people want to learn more about what you're doing, we've talked about where they can find the book, but if they want to find out more about you, where can they find you?
Sure. You can find me on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn as well as Instagram. And website is my name, reneevidor.com. And if you're someone who is a comparaholic, or you're like, I wonder if I am, I don't know, maybe I'm not, maybe I'm just a little competitive, then there is an assessment that is free for you to take. And you will get your comparaholic score to find out whether or not. And you can find that on my website, reneevidor.com/comparaholic. So,
Spell Renee, just because there's different variations for folks. How
oh,
would they?
good point. It's RENEEVIDOR.com.
Perfect. And I just want you to know, I took the quiz yesterday.
Ah,
It was fun. And yeah, I wasn't surprised by the results. I've got a little room to work on it, but that's okay.
we
That's
all do.
And we always will, right?
Well,
There's a huge misconception out there that when you become the Christian or you do this or whatever, all of a sudden you're there. And really it's just the beginning of the journey of
absolutely.
growing and building our character and becoming more like Jesus every day. So it's a beautiful journey, is it not?
It is. And when we compare ourselves to him, then we're able to continue to make progress. And progress is what he's asking for, not perfection.
That's gold right there. That is so well stated. And I think that's a beautiful place to end this conversation that could go on forever. So thank you so much for coming today. I am going to give you the opportunity. Is there any last thoughts that you had that we didn't talk about that you want to share before we sign off today?
I would just mention, be who you're created to be and do it he's designed for you to do, because that is how you will be able to win at life. And in that, you'll be able to make the impact that you were called to make in the world.
Perfect. Thank you so much, my friend. This was enjoyable. I look forward to future conversations together. We may not have an audience every time, but I am looking forward to furthering this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Well, there you have it. Wasn't that just a wonderful conversation with Renee? I'm just so blessed that she joined us today to talk about comparison, both, like I said, the pluses and the minuses of comparison. So I hope you'll check out Renee's book. It's Measuring Up: How to Win in a World of Comparison. And then I do encourage you to go check out on her website. And again, that's reneevidor.com. And do her assessment. It's fun. And then you'll get some emails from her and just learn more about this whole comparison game we play and how we can use it to our advantage. So that's all we have for today. I just really want to thank you so much for stopping by. I know how valuable your time is, and that you spent some time with us today just really blesses me. I hope you'll stop back in 2 weeks, because we're going to talk about the cry for clarity in that session in 2 weeks. So look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, go, be blessed, and remember to always, always live your more.